One more race to go before the summer break. We are in Budapest for round 14 of the 2025 season. It's a favorite for a lot of the drivers, mostly I think because it just reminds them of their early karting days. It'll probably be another weekend with a McLaren driver on the top step, but maybe some rain on Sunday can mix things up a little bit. Let's do a quick overview of the Hungaroring. There are a lot of new changes to the track this year. A completely new pit building, a completely new paddock, a new main grandstand, the main straight and the pit lanes have all been resurfaced. They did a really good job, and it looks like a huge upgrade, especially for the fans and the teams. For the actual racing side of things, this is a fun track. It's a quick track, but there's a reason why we call it Monaco without walls. It's so hard to pass here. They've tried to make improvements, but there's just no hope with today's version of F1 cars, and honestly, this has gone back years, even back into the 80s with the difficulties passing here. You really have two opportunities going into turn 1 and turn 2, but other than that, the straights just aren't long enough to make anything work. So qualifying is going to be crucial for this race. And because the track is so short, don't be surprised if Q1 gets a little wild with all 20 cars on track, spaced out, trying to get in a final run. Last year for the race, we had a 2-stop race. I'd expect that again if it's completely dry. But if it does rain on Sunday, the one-stop should still work. It's tricky here when it comes to finding the right setup for your car. Mostly slow and medium speed corners, but we do have a few high-speed corners too. And there are a lot of raised curbs here too, which is going to be the biggest difference with setup. For the teams, the decision basically comes down to whether they go with a higher ride height and try to ride the curbs, which would make them faster in the corners but slower in the straights, or do they go with a lower height and try to avoid the curbs, which obviously makes them slower in the corners, but faster in the straights. Now look, I haven't spent a second working in a Formula One garage, making decisions on setups and strategies, but it seems like the first option is the better one. Because there just aren't a lot of long straights at this track, you're going to lose a lot more overall lap time if you compromise your speed in the corners. But to make the setup change even trickier, we might get some rain this weekend. The weather forecast right now looks like it'll be dry on Friday and Saturday, but there's a slight chance of rain for Sunday. I'm really hoping we get a dry race, or if it's a wet Sunday, it stays wet the entire time. Because realistically, this championship is down to the two McLaren drivers, and we want to see them fight. We don't want to see repeats of last week where the race is decided by who's out in front and gets the first pit stop when the track's drying out. While we're on McLaren, let's go through the teams and their outlook for the weekend. And at this stage of the season, things are really going to start getting more predictable. We're past the technical directive change. Everyone's turning their focus towards next year's cars, so we really shouldn't expect any significant upgrade packages coming for any of the teams. So we have an idea of the pecking order, and any deviations from that should be more track specific than anything right now. Going to McLaren, probably some weird feelings for the drivers and team coming back here. Of course, this was where Oscar got his first win last year, and we got the infamous radio messages to Lando, guilting him into giving the lead back to Oscar to win that race. Like I said earlier, though, like we all know already, it'll probably be another McLaren 1-2 this weekend unless one of these drivers makes a huge mistake. It feels like a really important weekend for Lando Norris, though. We're off for a month after this weekend. If Lando wins and Oscar's P2, the championship gap closes to 9 points. If Oscar wins and Lando finishes P2, the championship lead for Oscar goes to 23 points. There's a big difference in those gaps when you're sitting at home for a month thinking about the final 10 races and your chances for the title. Luckily for Lando, though, he's always been very strong here. He has a 6-0 record in qualifying against his teammates at this track, and qualifying ahead of Oscar could be very important for his race on Sunday. But as long as both drivers qualify on the front row, there's still a chance. And this could be another track, like we saw in Spa, where qualifying P2 could be the better position because of the inside line you get going into turn 1. And that's what we saw last year between these two. Lando qualified on pole, Oscar qualified P2, but it was Oscar coming out of turn 1 in the lead. So qualifying will be important, but as long as both drivers are on the front row, the leader coming out of turn 1 will be a much bigger factor in deciding the race winner on Sunday. I think it'll be a relatively good weekend for Ferrari. They should be the second best team this weekend. Maybe Max is in the picture challenging them. Because of this track layout and it being so similar to Monaco, though, I'd expect Ferrari to have the advantage. Could this be another weekend where Lewis Hamilton tops his teammate? He, like Lando, has a very strong record here. Even better than Lando, honestly. He holds the record for most wins, most poles, most podiums, most laps led at this track. On the other hand, this isn't the best track for his teammate Charles Leclerc. His highest finish here was P4 both in 2019 and last year. Other than those, his highest finish has been P6, so not great in his standards. I would expect one of the Ferrari drivers to be on the podium on Sunday, but it looks like we might finally get that first Lewis Grand Prix podium of 2025. Some off-the-track news for them this week. Fred Vasseur has been given a multi-year contract by the team to continue as team principal. This was the right move for Ferrari. I know the expectations haven't been met as far as actually competing for a championship, but there are a lot of internal issues with Ferrari that are preventing them from being at that competitive level. And those issues wouldn't have been fixed by bringing in a new team principal. On top of that, too, there's a very good working relationship between Fred, Lewis, and Charles. So, in my mind, moving on from Fred just feels like it would have done more harm than good. I expect Max to be somewhere in the mix with Ferraris, though. He's won twice here, has 4 total podiums, but at the same time, in Max Verstappen terms, this really isn't his best track, and that's not his best track record. And it's not a track that necessarily suits the Red Bull car that great either. They struggle at tracks like this, that have more slow and medium speed corners and not a lot of long straights. My best guess for Max, P4, P5, depending on how strong the Ferraris look. I'm really interested to see where his teammate Yuki Tsunoda ends up this weekend. On paper, last weekend didn't look great, but a poor strategy call by the pit wall really killed his race. And we know that Red Bull gave Yuki the upgraded floor last weekend, which we didn't have previously. And he looked a lot stronger with that new floor too, which makes you think maybe we've been misjudging Yuki's abilities in this Red Bull car up until this point. I don't expect him to finish ahead of Max, but I don't think he should be that far off. Some off-the-track news for Red Bull too. During Media Day, Max announced that he will officially be driving for Red Bull in 2026 and made a comment that it's time to put the rumors to rest, and he was never going to leave. Yeah, okay. If that was the case, Max, why didn't you tell us this earlier? Why are you telling us now, a few days after it became mathematically impossible for you to drop to P4 in the driver's standings, which would have activated an exit clause in your contract? I think Max to Mercedes is still very much alive, just not for 2026. The timing of Max saying all of this is just too suspicious to me. On top of that, too, the 2 Mercedes drivers still haven't been signed, but it looks like George Russell should be signing a 2-year contract with Mercedes that would keep him on the team through 2027. We're also expecting Kimi Antonelli to get a multi-year deal, and I would guess it would also be in that 2-year range. So you might think, okay, well, that rules Max out for 2027 as well. Not really. The terms of the contract will be very interesting to see if there are any exit clauses for Mercedes to get rid of one of these drivers for Max if it came to it. But even if there aren't, Mercedes might be setting themselves up to just buy out the final year of a contract to get Max on the team for 2027. For Mercedes this weekend, I'm expecting them to be the 4th best team. When you look at their performances at similar tracks like Monaco, Barcelona, it hasn't been great. They've clearly lost their way, and it makes sense when you think about how much this car struggles in warmer conditions, and we've just been going through the summer months. The team held an emergency meeting with the drivers this past week after Spa to try and figure out what's been going wrong with the car, and it looks like that meeting led to the team to decide to revert back to their old rear suspension for this weekend. I hope this is a move to just figure out where they've gone wrong in developing this car. And maybe it's a move to help Kimi with his confidence too, because he looked so much more comfortable with the old suspension at the beginning of the year, and he desperately needs a good weekend heading into the summer break. But if this is an attempt to make something out of this year's car and make it competitive again, it feels like a waste of time to me. Sure, there's still a fight with Ferrari for P2 in the constructor standings, and Red Bull's not far behind either, but Mercedes is not winning any championships this year. That's clear. So just turn the page towards 2026. Try to get the biggest advantage you can, because Mercedes is about fighting for championships, not fighting for second place. So unlike our friends at Sky Sports, I kind of like talking about the midfield teams. So let's run through them a little bit for this weekend. Starting with Williams, they had a little bit of a bounce back weekend in Spa, a very good result for Alex Albon. Not so great for Carlos Sainz, but it looks like they took a wrong turn with their setup for that race, banking on a race with more wet weather. They should fall back to earth this weekend, though. It's just not a great track for them. Too many slow corners and not enough long straights. They could surprise us and end up in the bottom of the points, but I wouldn't really bank on it. I'm expecting at least one of the Sauber drivers to finish in the points. They've just completely turned this season around. 5 straight points finishes for the team, and they've come from very different tracks. Sauber's almost turning into the McLaren of the midfield teams, not really with their dominance over other teams, but just with the wide operating window that this car has and their ability to perform at very different circuits. This could be a huge weekend for them in the midfield race, though. Williams is still 27 points ahead of them, but they could make up some significant ground if they get a strong points finish this weekend and Williams falls out of the points. There's a chance it could be a really good weekend for Racing Bulls, too. We have to give some credit to Liam Lawson. I, and a lot of other people, gave him a lot of criticism earlier in the season, and it was a little deserved, too. But he's been on great form lately. 2 points finishes in the last 3 races, and he's just been a lot more consistent. So I really like Liam's chances for a points finish this weekend. Like Kimi, I think it's also an important weekend for his teammate Isaac Hadjar. He hasn't been struggling as much as Kimi, but the P20 in Spa really hurt him. He needs a good result this weekend to take that bad taste out of his mouth before the summer break, and I think there's a good chance he also gets a points finish that gives him that. I don't have high hopes for Aston Martin this weekend, a really tough outing in Spa for them, which makes you think the struggles will continue this weekend too. Setup will go a long way for them though. They struggle a lot with high downforce tracks, so I expect them to go the opposite direction with setup to ride the curbs and get the most out of the car, and I think that'll be the better decision for them anyway and for most teams. But even with that, I don't think either of these drivers find themselves in the points on Sunday. It's just too much competition ahead of them in the midfield teams. For Haas, a special place for Esteban Ocon where he got his only win in Formula 1 back in 2021. He'll be hoping for some wet weather to get a repeat of that race weekend. But Haas also seems pretty optimistic about this weekend too. They've obviously taken a step forward with their latest upgrade, and that upgrade does favor higher speed corners more, but it could still yield some benefits this weekend too. It's just so hard to say with this team. They've been so up and down and unpredictable. Either they have it and they look great, or they're somewhere at the bottom of the order. So we'll have to wait and see what Sunday holds in store for them. For Alpine, Pierre Gasly might be their only hope this weekend. This car hasn't been great. There's a reason they're last in the constructor standings, but somehow, some way, Pierre has been outperforming the car almost every weekend. 2 straight points finishes for him. It'll be hard to keep that going this weekend with all of the competition ahead of them, but as we've learned week after week with Pierre, it's not impossible. I think this might be it for Franco Colapinto, though. There's just not much to say there. He's nowhere near where he needs to be, and it's not if Alpine moves on from him, it's when. In the summer break makes a lot of sense to make that change if they do want to do that before the season ends. It'll be very interesting to see who that replacement driver will be if they do take Franco out of the seat. My best guess is Paul Aaron, one of the reserve drivers. It sounded like they wanted Bottas, but that seems out of the question now that it looks like he's signing with Cadillac for next year, if he hasn't already. It's tough for Franco, but that's the name of the game sometimes. Some podium predictions for Sunday. In P3, I have Lewis Hamilton. P2, Lando Norris. And P1, taking his second straight victory and a 23-point lead in the driver's standings, Oscar Piastri. Like I said before, I expect the McLaren to just be a step ahead of everyone else this weekend. And I do like Lando to get pole on Saturday, moving that streak to 7-0 over his teammates. But I think we see a repeat of last year with Oscar getting around him at the start, going into turn 1. I think it'll be a closer battle after that point than we saw last weekend. But that might be all Oscar needs, especially if it's a wet start to the race. I think Lewis will have the edge over Charles to get that P3 and that coveted podium position that he's been dying for all season for a Grand Prix. And that really comes down to Lewis doing very well at this track, historically, and Charles just struggling historically. You never know with Max, but I think the Ferraris will be a little out of reach for him, and he might just be stuck in no man's land for most of the race. After that, could have some chaos. Maybe it's one of the Mercedes, maybe it's Yuki, or maybe we see a bunch of midfield drivers crashing the party. All right, that's a wrap on today's episode previewing the Hungarian Grand Prix. I'm trying to learn from my mistakes. A lot of times I come on here on these preview episodes and I say, hey, let's be optimistic. Maybe we're going to get a great race on Sunday. Maybe we're going to get some chaos. I'm going to switch gears this weekend. I'm going to say it won't be that great of a race. We're not going to get a lot of overtakes. We're not going to get a lot of excitement. See how this reverse psychology works, but I will be back on Sunday with a recap episode going over everything that we saw this weekend in Budapest. Thank you to everyone for tuning in and listening. Until next time.